SpaceX has merged with xAI, furthering the partnership between the space industry and the AI bubble. The engineering synergy between the two companies' financial and accounting departments is clear, but the synergy from the product side remains to be seen.
Meanwhile, Starlink continues its march into the direct-to-device market, while competitors have partnered to rebuff their advance. Apple, Amazon, AT&T, Globalstar, and AST Global are all major players, partnering in various capacities to beat the social media giant.
Hydrogen may be lighter than air, but it only helps you get off the ground if it stays in your rocket. The Artemis 2 launch has been delayed at least a month due to such a hydrogen leak, as SpaceX takes only 4 days to investigate and resolve a second-stage failure of their Falcon 9.
Welcome to this week's episode of Space Times Podcast. As always, I'm Harrison Lambert,
here with Paul Mayer.
Excited to share this week's space industry updates with you. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Subscribe to our newsletter if you want the written breakdown of our episodes emailed to your inbox every Monday morning. Drop us a comment on our LinkedIn or Blue Sky with anything you enjoyed or would like to see. And as always, listen weekly on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you're receiving this signal.
Well, Harrison, we've got 3 major topics to discuss today: communications, Earth observation, and launch. And as per usual, one of the companies that's present through all 3 is SpaceX. A couple of big announcements for SpaceX this week, one of which is the reporting that's come out that SpaceX has been building its own Starlink-enabled smartphone or has been considering doing so. This is out of Reuters. Elon has gone on to deny that SpaceX is designing a phone in any capacity, but the possibility for a Starlink branded or Starlink enabled AI device is still very much on the table. So SpaceX and Starlink are very clearly continuing to play and push further into the direct to device market and the D2D space. There's reason to believe that maybe this new capability or this new device or phone equivalent push coming out of SpaceX has something to do with Apple's billion-dollar investment in Globalstar, which that investment pretty effectively closes the door on any relationship between the two as partners for this effort. So SpaceX may be deciding to just try and cut Apple out of their direct-to-device value chain altogether. Spanish telecommunication company MasOrange is going to trial Starlink's direct-to-cell service under a new agreement with SpaceX. They plan to carry out a technical pilot in the province of Valladolid. And this marks the second major direct-to-device partnership that SpaceX has made in recent memory. They have one with T-Mobile already on the books, and they at some point partnered with Virgin Media in the UK. I believe that was late last year. So this would be the second or third additional sort of partnership. This one a little bit more focused on execution and implementation in a trial basis, but still a lot of progress for SpaceX and the direct-to-device market as well.
Yeah, it's kind of a big step into the EU, which they've been pushing for. Virgin Media was kind of their first push there, but technically UK is not EU anymore. So this is kind of a foothold that they needed in the European Union, which has been pushing back very hard against Starlink in the past year. But it seems they can't stop progress. It's coming to their shores whether they like it or not. Obviously, they're standing up a lot of capability. We talked about Open Constellation launching their communication network last week. Not so much a D2D play. OneWeb has a D2D play, but they're a generation behind. So this gives Starlink plenty of room to push into this area. AST SpaceMobile did partner with Germany to expand their D2D market, so I wouldn't be surprised if they're going to have a harder time pushing into the northern European countries, and maybe Germany is able to push back with AST while Europe stands up their own sovereign capabilities. So Starlink definitely moving fast, trying to gather as many partnerships as possible before other companies are able to get their footholds. Like you pointed out with Apple, that one's a bit interesting since Globalstar is trying to sell their company. I wouldn't be surprised if SpaceX tries to cut Apple off at the knees here if they're not willing to play ball on a partnership with them, especially given the rumors that they're going to build a phone. It seems like they have a couple plays here that could possibly stop Apple from kind of leapfrogging their efforts to build out a phone direct-to-device kind of communications connection across the globe. So Definitely interesting if they build a phone. I certainly wouldn't buy one, but Apple for life, I guess.
I never considered you to be such a loyalist, but
Now I am.
I mean, this comes in the same breath as AT&T and Amazon announcing an extensive partnership that effectively merges their terrestrial fiber infrastructure. And both AT&T and Amazon are companies that are vying for and trying to angle for a slice of the direct-to-device market share. As we've already sort of reported, AT&T is currently partnered with AST SpaceMobile for direct-to-device, and Amazon's Kuiper and Leo projects are already pushing to become a major layer of that infrastructure as well.
Yeah, I don't think it's so much of a direct-to-device play for Amazon. I think it's more meant as commercial backhaul kind of infrastructure. So I think AST is still their D2D partner for AT&T, but Amazon Leo sounds like they're going to be like a business offering for AT&T since they do internet services as well.
Well, for the terrestrial fiber infrastructure, absolutely. But knowing that Amazon themselves are a player for the relationship, this is potentially a foot in the doorway for the two of them to build out a further direct-to-device relationship in the next coming quarters or months here.
Yes, I don't know the roadmap for Amazon Leo's direct-to-device aspirations. I think it's probably a generation behind as well, kind of like OneWeb. And I would be surprised if it arrives anytime soon, given that they announced TerraWave last week, and that seems to be their focus is high throughput applications for business. I think it's wise to try to not compete in the more frothy D2D market and focus more on the business side of things, which Amazon makes most of their money from.
So you think Amazon is going to seed the D2D market in its entirety?
I think so. I mean, every time Amazon tries to do a commercial kind of user hardware service, they kind of fail. Like Alexa didn't do too hot as a home device. The Fire devices aren't very profitable. Amazon makes most of their money through B2B services. They're Amazon Cloud Services are going to make most of their money. I think if they focus on that with their constellations, that's where they'll see the most profit.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, now that you mention it, I think the only B2C layer of Amazon's business lines that I can think of as being super successful is the actual delivery platform and potentially Amazon Prime, but almost or Prime Video or streaming. But point being that almost every other business venture that they've made, the ones that have stuck have absolutely been sort of a B2B model where the end consumer isn't the actual point of sale or customer. So that's a strong and sort of compelling piece of evidence as to why they would stay out of the D2D market, which is going to be much more of a B2C play.
Yeah.
Additionally, Cesium Astro has completed a $470 million raise to scale operations. They've raised $270 million in a Series C of equity and $200 million in debt. This comes off the back of a $60 million Series B raise in 2022 and a $65 million Series B extension or Series B plus raise in 2024. And this raise is intended to scale and rapidly expand their manufacturing capability and their production. So Cesium Astro has been building software-defined multi-beam phased array payloads, components, systems, and more recently, they've been expanding those systems into entire satellites. And this raise is for them to be able to start mass producing what they've been working on and building.
200 million of that from the Export-Import Bank of the United States, which this is coming at the same time that there's kind of a push for the Arsenal of Freedom effort through the U.S., which I know is bringing a lot of attention to some of the defense and aerospace players. So this is a lot of money for Cesium Astro, which has traditionally just been like a comms payload provider, or comms subsystem provider. But it looks like they have some aspirations to build out their own communications constellation, which, given their advantage in the comms aspect of things, could be totally possible play. Looks like they have a what's becoming a more standard kind of bus, a lot of power for optical terminals and a high throughput comms phased array. And 500 million should get them to deploying some of this. I know they're talking about spending most of it on scaling out manufacturing, which is great to see. That's kind of the whole purpose of this Arsenal of Freedom thing, is to re-onshore a lot of American manufacturing. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of the portion of comms constellations that Cesium competes for. But I'm almost thinking they're going to be more like a contract manufacturer for sovereign communications capabilities. So possibly competing with Starshield, I think is the most likely play here.
I don't think you're far off with that. I know that some of Cesium Astro's messaging and some of their stated focus has been for the proliferated war network. It's been for Golden Dome, with more specifically for their payloads and their subsystems and systems solutions, rather than their entire satellite solutions, which I believe is titled the Element. But there's a definite need in both of those marketplaces for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that among the investors in this round include Airbus and a Japanese development bank. So definitely international interest. I didn't see them in the SpaceRise consortium for Airbus, but I wouldn't be surprised if a partnership arises there. Maybe for Iris Squared, but given that they want sovereign capability for that, I kind of doubt it, but maybe for a subsystem.
That's true. I mean, I think what I find most interesting about Cesium Astro is the fact that they started as a component manufacturer making specific components for their active software-defined phased array solutions, and have from there effectively built out to include the entirety of a satellite platform. And the fact that they've been able to do so in the last 10 years, I believe they were founded in 2017. But the fact that they've been able to do so and to own the entirety of the tech stack and own that entire sort of verticality of what we're looking at here, because they've been able to do the entire satellite, that has undoubtedly prevented them from being acquired and rolled up by somebody else. Yeah. Their ability to actually leverage their payloads and their technologies on a platform that's optimized for their hardware and their capabilities is something that's helping them sort of stay independent and keep going. I would have thought that somebody like an Airbus or somebody like an Airbus or maybe a Lockheed Martin or an RTX, some of the big people who are on their cap table, I would have thought they would have looked to potentially sort of acquire once they'd proven out the components and the subsystem level. I would have thought that they would have been a prime acquisition target, but they managed to make it through that sort of that phase and have gone to the point where it's easier for these major incumbents, for these major players, to just effectively contract out that capability and that work to them. Do you think for the team there?
Do you think it's like Airbus's way of continuing to make money from U.S. growth, since there's like a disconnect growing between the nations?
I think there's some definite attempts to hedge against, I'll say, geopolitical risk. So having revenue earners on both sides of the pond is definitely a good way to go about it. So I wouldn't at all be surprised if that were a motivating factor. Additionally, Gilat Satellite Networks received over $10 million in orders to support LEO constellations. So they got a $6 million order back in November. And as we spoke about last week, ground stations were pretty big. So Gilat is out and growing in the sector, making good progress. Additionally, Gilmour Space has partnered with Singapore and US-based Transcelestial to integrate and test optical communications on the MMS-2 ALARASat mission later this year. MMS-1 launched mid-2025, and Gilmour raised $150 million last week. We spoke about Transcelestial last year for lunar laser comms, and it's interesting to see sort of all three of these entities, and really to see this Venn diagram show up in real time.
Yeah, optical communications has been a huge growth area in the aerospace industry. Transcelestial was on our map because we talked about it late last year for that Lunar LaserCon, but they are one of the up and comers out of Singapore. So it's great to see some growth for some of the more traditional use cases here. The communications that Gilmore Space is proposing here is a great expansion upon their capabilities, especially given that 150 million raised last week. That was primarily focused on developing their rocket launch capability. It's good to see that they're also advancing their satellite capability. So Australia is getting a great company here, building out a lot of advanced technology, rapidly advancing Australia's space capabilities, which we don't talk about a lot, but it's interesting to see another nation kind of rapidly developing this. And for Singapore to have such an advanced technology that's getting some traction here is also neat. They actually had 2 contracts this week. So in the Earth observation side of things, Hex 20 partnered with Translatial as well to integrate laser-based intersatellite communication into their DINC-N Earth observation constellation. So this is an Indian Earth observation company, and they build small Earth observation satellites. These are like 50 kilograms to 150 kilogram small sats, very cheap per U. And it's interesting that they're integrating a laser intersatellite communications link here, because there's no way at that size that they're fitting 3 or 4. So less that it's kind of a pervasive net of satellites, but more likely that it's able to pass the images over to a constellation to downlink quickly, which kind of bypasses the bottleneck that is ground stations. We've seen it with companies like Muon Space, where they got the Placer terminal integrated to downlink their fire images quickly. We saw a few weeks ago with AuroraSat launching their near-infrared FireSat imager on top of the Kepler laser-enabled communication satellite. So I'm expecting that these laser terminals are less so to build a mesh network and more so to give them a higher throughput lane in which to downlink this Earth observation data, which could be a really great differentiating feature for a newer Earth observation company competing in a very established, very crowded kind of sector of the space industry. Tomorrow.io raises $175 million for their persistent weather tracking constellation. They're calling this Deep Sky. It is an AI-enabled weather constellation that will have a 60-minute global revisit. So that's an update to weather around the globe every hour, which is quite quick. This is going to be an AI-enabled constellation, which is a growing trend we're seeing. Still kind of in the early phases of this being a trend. So most of the time, this is just kind of having AI for the sake of saying AI and being able to raise these large rounds. But we are starting to see some benefits to having AI integrated with the system, particularly for Tomorrow.io. It's a microwave sounding satellite that's able to generate weather data. And since it's scanning the entire globe, this is a pretty significant amount of data. So the more insight that they're able to generate on orbit, that means the less data that they have to downlink to the ground in order to drive value, which ultimately just means a more responsive constellation and ultimately more value. We see that elsewhere this week with Vantor, who won a $5.3 million NGA contract to spot terrain changes using their commercial satellite data. So this is using AI, not necessarily just on the spacecraft, but on the ground as well, which is where we're seeing the trend develop more value. Companies are end user companies that are consuming the kind of Earth observation data that these companies are generating are less interested in the raw data and more interested in insights that they're able to get from that data. And so Vantor's been one of the leaders in this area for quite a while now, at least since we've been there a decade ago. And they're integrating sensor data from all their satellites as well as third-party satellites into their platform to provide insights rather than just raw data that they can then deliver to their customers. This is under the NGA Luno program, which is meant to give the government more agile capabilities to detect valuable information. So 5.3 million, pretty big win for basically just a software service, which is where Vantor generates most of their money. One of the main competitors to Vantor is BlackSky. Both of them own 30 centimeter resolution satellites. BlackSky Gen 3 being the competitor to Worldview Legion, which is operated by Vantor. So cool to see both of them winning contracts this week, kind of in competition. This one is from an international defense partner, though, and they're pretty vague on details. They don't claim who the international defense customer is, and they just say that it's a 7-figure deal. So same vein as the Vantor contract, but BlackSky is seeing traction more globally. They both managed to win international contracts, but it seems this week that BlackSky is having more success abroad. This is for tactical ISR operational needs, so intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities. This is a strong signal that the international customers are shifting more towards dynamic monitoring capabilities. So this is kind of the other use case for these Earth observation capabilities, not just generating insights, but having the capability to flexibly leverage space assets to gather information quickly relevant to national defense.
One of the things from our time at Maxar that was a pretty consistent theme was the desire to push into the analytics, the data insights, to push into the higher margin sides of the business, and in so many words, to divest themselves from the really low margin, capital intensive, more or less commoditized hardware sides of the business. And that is likely more a reflection of the fact that the geospatial hardware that Maxar was working with at the time had been pretty well established and, for the most part, had been around for a long time. So it sort of was commoditized. And so a player like BlackSky, a part of the new space economy where the hardware isn't nearly as well established, where there's still a lot of differentiation, where there's still a lot of innovation in the space, having that hardware allows for a lot of additional unique capabilities. So I'm super interested to see how BlackSky's ability to react and adapt, and BlackSky's ability to reassign or retask assets on orbit winds up being a meaningful differentiator to Vantor's product offerings.
Yeah, they seem to be able to carve out their own markets. They're both doing fairly well, but they have pretty comparable, value offerings. So I think AI is kind of one of these paths that they're both pursuing that's going to diverge them for a little bit. But I totally expect BlackSky to be able to compete on that level as well. On the launch side of things, SpaceX is coming up again, but for less fun reasons. Falcon 9 was paused for 4 days due to an upper stage failure. The upper stage failed to return to Earth, which is not what you want to hear from a Falcon 9 launch. This is the first pause in quite a long time. 4 days, though, is a very impressive turnaround. Obviously, they found nothing to be too concerned about and returned to launch cadence pretty quickly, which is important given how quickly they're launching at this point. So hopefully we don't see this kind of failure again. But luckily, no spacecraft were lost. They were able to successfully complete their mission. Artemis has a lot longer delay, at least a month. And this is due to a hydrogen leak, which is a bit scarier. They're very common. I mean, we were talking about like valve issues with ISAR last week, and Neutron was having tank problems the week before. So, fuel is always a concern. These are the Aerojet Rocketdyne engines, I believe, since it would be the first stage with hydrogen fuel. And since they're launching 4 humans around the Earth, you want to be extra careful that you're not leaking fuel during your launch. So they're definitely taking their time to investigate. There have been de-integrations of rockets in the past for these kind of problems. So hopefully it doesn't get to that point. I'm thinking back with like the James Webb Telescope. I remember they had to like de-integrate because of a hydrogen leak then, which was delayed them by years. So hopefully this is not that bad. Hopefully they're able to figure it out and solve it on the pad, and they're back to their launch schedule in a month. But I know they're taking lots of precautions to make sure that this goes smoothly.
Sure,
since we're launching people.
Yeah, I'd rather take a break than a fracture. So good. It's good practice to delay, identify the problem, solve the problem.
Absolutely. On the same launch pad, the Cape Canaveral launch pad, the FAA approved Starship to launch from LC-39A. So this is the historic launch pad that Falcon 9 has been launching out of. I found it surprising that they were able to approve Starship, although it does sound like they're going to have to do some renovations to accommodate it. The fire trench that they have there is I find it hard to believe that it's rated for the amount of thrust that Starship is providing, seeing as how they destroyed their launch pads in Boca Chica quite a few times until they got the kind of construction of it correct. So it sounds like they're most likely moving Falcon 9 to a different pad, which, we reported a few months ago that Cape Canaveral is expanding the number of pads they have, given the increase in launch cadence and the increase in launch providers. So most likely Falcon 9 will be getting its own new pad, but this seems like a slow phasing out of Falcon 9 over to Starship as Starship comes online this year.
So as we alluded to earlier in the show, SpaceX has officially merged with xAI, and this effectively puts one of the stalwarts of the space economy and the space industry hand in hand with what many would argue is a bubble in the AI industry, which personally I have some concerns regarding. Orbital data centers have already been a pretty hot topic in the space economy and in the space industry, and orbital data centers are directly related. Could not be more correlated with the AI industry. And so having one of the major launch providers now merge with an AI company, this ties the entirety of the space industry to the AI bubble, whether we like it or not. And so that's a pretty big concern that I would have, that when there is a correction in the AI bubble, not only will sort of the business needs and the anticipated markets for orbital data centers, for the infrastructure necessary to support those orbital data centers, and everything else that ultimately goes into providing the power, compute, storage, and what have you necessary to power the AI machine, that not only will those connections take a hit, but also the biggest current launch provider on the market will now also see a proportional or similar detriment or hit. So the correlation between the space and AI industries has undoubtedly gone up. That causes some concerns for me. That probably causes concerns for other folks who are skeptical that the AI industry is currently sort of healthy and self-sustaining, that it's not a bubble and there's not going to be some sort of correction there. But Harrison would love to hear your thoughts on it as well.
Yeah, I when the rumor came out last week and we reported on it, I was pretty skeptical about this move as well. I don't like the financial engineering getting muddled in with real engineering, because all the money that SpaceX makes historically has gone towards development of really cool capabilities. And now I'm worried that profit is going to be funneled into xAI, which is just a money sink like any AI company is these days. So my main concern is just that money that could be spent on Mars development is going to be spent on AI development. And that's not where I want to see that money going to. This does bring the value of SpaceX up over $1 trillion in anticipation of their IPO, which kind of answers the question we had a few months ago when they did their private raise that brought them up to, I believe, $800 billion in valuation, of how they're going to double their valuation. This is one way to do it. It's not the way I like to see, but that's I guess how cookie crumbles here. It's a weird play, but doesn't totally not make sense. I mean, orbital data centers is something they're pursuing. They did file for $1 million. I saw they just started installing a cyclotron. So they're actually engineering to build this thing, which means that they're serious, means the IPO is almost definitely going to go through. And the rumor is that they might merge with Tesla and build their own smartphone. Like, there's an expansion across all fronts for SpaceX to kind of become the everything company, which is kind of what he marketed X as. So, I wouldn't bet against Musk. for valid reasons or not, I think that they're going to be fine. I just really hope that this doesn't slow down development for Mars exploration.
Yeah. This merger gets messy quickly, and there's enough capital and there's enough financial, social, political capital behind this effort to where it can probably find success, whether that success is deserved or not. But to your point, SpaceX has always been very good about developing and delivering new and innovative step function space capabilities and technologies. And the messier that this corporate structure gets, the less likely it is that SpaceX will continue to sort of deliver on that, which is a disappointment.
Yeah. Would you expect any sort of like spin-off of SpaceX? Because there was talk about a year ago that Starlink would spin off once it became profitable, but I can't tell if that makes more or less sense now.
I think it would, well, ultimately it would sort of depend on what Elon's goals are. He's still the person with the most equity sort of in all of these companies in aggregate. So he still is the one whose vision will ultimately get built. So if his vision is for AI data centers and an AI enabled Mars, or whatever it is, but if his vision involves extensive Martian human presence, then I would expect to see a couple of different efforts explicitly sort of spun out. So maybe they do ultimately answer to SpaceX. Maybe there is some ultimate direct report to SpaceX or to the company X, the everything company, as it comes out. But I would still expect there to be some very, very targeted efforts at that. But any sort of corporate reorganization, any sort of restructuring, any sort of change of leadership in that capacity, changing in vision or changing in leadership, it just makes things messy and muddy for a little while until everything can sort of clarify and settle down a little bit, so to speak. So when the dust clears, it's entirely possible, but I would be astounded if that happened within, let's say that this merger is officially done February 1st, and let's say an IPO happens in 6 months. So what would that be? July 1st? I would be astounded to see sort of breakouts like that happen within 18 months of July.
Yeah. I would bet that they don't spin anything off. I think the obfuscation of the businesses is kind of the point. It's kind of in Musk's playbook to always distract from shortcomings in one arena with projections in another. And it's worked well for Tesla's valuation, where when car sales aren't doing too well, they can focus on robotic development. I think the same thing will happen here. Is like if the AI is stalling out, they can point to their rocket launches as escalating, and on a public market that probably gives him the cover he needs to grow a business in a market that he historically does not like to play around in. So
yeah, I mean, he's been very clear that he wants nothing to do with publicly owned companies, specifically because the reporting and the transparency required from publicly owned companies sort of prohibits the obfuscation that allows him to sort of borrow from Peter to pay Paul in order to keep everything moving forward constructively. So having a structure that is more muddled and harder to work with it sort of allows the leadership team to it allows the leadership team a little bit more leeway in sort of how much transparency and how much insight they offer, how deep they want to go. So it still allows for more cover and more privacy, so to speak.
Yeah, it makes sense, because I haven't heard him complain about it too much recently. I think he kind of learned the playbook, and it's a playbook that we see growing across the industry and across the market in general, is consolidation and monopolies, this kind of growth of large companies help concentrate wealth and protect them against downside.
Yep. Speaking of concentration, I mean, SpaceX just this week acquired Hexagon Purus ASA's aerospace subsidiary for $15 million. They manufacture carbon wrapped fuel tanks. We had mentioned previously that there were a couple of different fuel tank challenges that I believe Rocket Lab experienced on both the Neutron and Electron, and then we had alluded to a couple of challenges that SpaceX had experienced even earlier. So SpaceX looking to maintain some competitive advantage and maintain some technological capability head start here on what is a very valuable part of the launch tech stack. Additionally, York Space filed a motion asking to dismiss its protest on January 28th. So what's going on here was that York Space effectively filed a suit over a year ago against Apex. And they challenged a $46 million Space Force SBIR that Apex was awarded. And now that York Space is public, they have tried to they've wanted to dismiss this legal claim and this legal action because now that they're a public company, this is not something we want to deal with. They just want to be able to go and execute and return value to shareholders, and that's what their focus is on. And the purpose of the lawsuit was in large part to try and sort of slow down and hinder one of their big competitors, Apex. But since they've gotten the big influx of capital, they want to be looking forward, not backwards.
Yeah, and Apex is one of their main competitors, but I almost feel like they managed to slow them down a bit. Apex did a huge raise last year, but they've yet to launch any of their satellites, whereas York Space has already launched dozens of satellites. So I think they're less concerned about Apex being able to compete with them on some of these contracts as they were a year ago.
That could be the case. I mean, one of the traps that I see a lot of early stage founders and entrepreneurs sort of falling into is the idea of needing to the old adage of needing to dim another's candle to make theirs shine brighter. And more often than not, it's your time is just better spent executing and kicking butt at what you do rather than trying to stop somebody else. You know what I mean? So like you're gonna dedicate 100% of your time to executing on what you need to do. You're going to do a great job. If you dedicate 80% of your time to slowing down somebody else, or if you dedicate 80% of your time to doing what you need to do and 20% of your time to slowing down somebody else, you might slow them down, but effectively, you're going to get diminishing returns. So it's just a net negative in most cases. Like you wind up only performing at 80% and they wind up only performing at 90%. So yeah, you did hinder their performance, but they're still outperforming you. You hindered yourself more. So all of this to say that, it's great to see York Space sort of putting their heads down and just executing and kicking butt here.
Yeah, the challenge had broader implications too. The challenge was against the SBIR instrument itself, saying that the Space Force was using it to fund a company rather than develop new technology. Their argument was that Apex already... So the SBIR was for dual orbit capabilities, and York was arguing that Apex already had developed that technology. So the SBIR was not developing the technology, it was just giving money to Apex, which... I don't like that argument. While it's true, and I'm sure the government would agree, that's what it's intended for. It's just a way to block new companies from getting access to funding. SBIRs are a nice smaller instrument, and I don't mind the government playing kind of fast and loose with it, especially since they're trying to get more flexible. Like this challenge was not, I didn't like York challenging this. Like if the government wants to spend money on new technology, regardless of how developed it is, like more power to them.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen similar suits brought in other cases where, it basically boils down to the old sort of pork barreling arguments of this contract, you gave this contract to our competitor, you should have given this contract to us, or in so many words. And so, it's not surprising to see this happening. We've seen Blue Origin and SpaceX each both sort of wind up filing different versions of this same sort of complaint and the same sort of suit. And they very rarely actually lead to any major change in how funds are distributed or appropriated, but it does slow things down, and it makes life harder for everybody involved. But great to see things moving forward for York Space, and hopefully for Apex as well. Morpheus Space has secured a new strategic investment of $15 million to expand their team and boost industrial production at their reloaded facility in Dresden, Germany. This enables fast and reliable delivery of electronic propulsion systems at a full constellation scale. So they're scaling to 100 new units per year, ultimately 500. And last month we saw Astra reach 100 units per year. And Europe, as we've spoken about 100 times, if not 1,000 times, is very much looking to compilate and build out their own sovereign capabilities. So getting a similar level of production out of Morpheus Space is going to be great, especially after the producers for OHB provided thrusters to switch to 12 late last year. This represents the same sort of value add throughout the tech stack.
Yeah, it's just good to see a smaller company kind of playing in this space since OHB's a big German juggernaut. I almost wanted to add Morpheus to the tech advances because I thought it was so cool. Like this FEEP technology is pretty uncommon, but given that it speaks to space sovereignty and it's an investment, we kept it in business news. But for those that don't know, a FEEP thruster is a field emission electric propulsion unit. So this actually uses liquid metal to create thrust, and he emits it through a series of nozzles and creates this kind of field effect, which is really neat. It reportedly has higher thrust, higher ISP, lower power consumption, and very interesting to see a different kind of fuel source. This could actually be beneficial for a lot of use cases in terms of storing long-term storage of fuel and fuel transfer capabilities. So great to see Morpheus getting some investment and to scale up to hundreds of units per year. Like I'd love to see that. And I'm really curious to see what kind of companies start buying this thruster from them. So for tech advances this week, these are topics that don't fall into our trends or are really related to business move. We've got a really exciting one out of Viridian Space. They have signed a 5-year cooperative research and development agreement called a CRADA with the U.S. Air Force to develop Viridian's ABEP technology and to work together on studies leveraging VLEO. So VLEO is a rapidly growing space sector. This is very low Earth orbit, so it's generally below 300 kilometers in altitude. This is not done by a lot of spacecraft. There was the GOES spacecraft probably about a decade and a half ago. There was Albedo, which was last year, doing low Earth imaging. And as recently, Redwire has talked about their Sabre spacecraft as a platform for VLEO. But all those spacecraft have used traditional Hall effect thrusters. So once they run out of fuel, they're done for. Viridian has a new approach to thrusters. They have what's called an air breathing thruster. So this uses air as sort of the fuel to generate plasma. They accelerate the air through a series of electrostatic fins to create high energy plasma that creates thrust. So as long as they can scale the solar arrays to large enough scale, they could potentially just run this thing nonstop to keep their orbit, since in VLEO, the higher atmosphere causes them to deorbit quicker. It's a great sign that the U.S. Air Force is interested in their technology. Likely means it's at a test readiness level that they're willing to work with them to launch it and try it out. The tech is nothing crazy new. Electrostatic acceleration of air has kind of been a thing, and we've seen it sometimes in aircraft, but to actually deploy it at this scale requires some engineering challenges to be overcome. So great sign that Viridian's on their way to doing that. They're one of very few companies that are doing air breathing thrusters. So again, like the FEEP, it is very cool to see new kinds of thrusters being worked on in the space industry. Satellite servicing startup Starfish Space has tapped Quindar for mission operations software. This is after Starfish recently won a large contract to do deorbiting of PWSA satellites recently. So it looks like they are gearing up to accomplish that mission by tapping a pretty advanced mission operations software company That's pretty new, developing this technology. But they've already got contracts with pretty much every ground station provider out there. Looks like KSAT, Atlas, Leaf Space, they've all partnered with Quindar as well as Air Force, which likely makes them a good partner for Starfish, who's going to be working with the government as well. So very promising company, Quindar. Interesting to see how many contracts they've won, as they're pretty new. But Starfish will definitely be one of the most advanced applications for them, since Starfish is a rendezvous proximity operations spacecraft. Quindar is going to need to handle some pretty advanced maneuvers here, as well as the fact that they're working with the PWSA constellations, which will number in the hundreds of satellites with very dissimilar spacecraft through a variety of different orbits and applications. So this is going to be a definite challenge for Quindar, but if their mission operations software works out well for Starfish, they're really well positioned for a space that holds a lot of value with relatively few players, at least at this scale.
Yeah, I had the privilege of speaking with and meeting with the head of BD at Starfish in Orlando for space mobility, and they played things pretty close to the vest, but Starfish has been making a lot of progress with multiple different sort of government initiatives. The most recent of which we announced, I believe, two weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, the $54.5 million contract. And so partnering with Quindar is a step forward in that capacity, allowing Starfish to focus on their specialty and allowing effectively contracting out the ops software to somebody who specializes in that themselves. And both friends of the show, Veridian and Starfish, have had some fabulous weeks and months here. So hopefully we can get them both on the show soon.
Voyager Technologies and MaxSpace have announced a strategic partnership to advance expandable space exploration technology, which will serve as a cornerstone for future lunar and deep space exploration efforts for habitation and storage. This is following Voyager's partnership with Axiom Space last week on the 5th crewed mission to the ISS. So Voyager and MaxSpace and Axiom, they're all expandable habitat technologies. MaxSpace we talked about a month ago when they announced that they were creating a new kind of habitat that could fit on board of a Falcon 9 vehicle. So they're able to launch an entire habitat on one launch, which is fairly unique amongst these players. Voyager has the Starlab, and Axiom has their unit, which I believe they call an Axiom as well. But those are meant more as a assemblable collection of habitations to create sort of an ISS replacement. So what I find most interesting is that Voyager is partnering with a lot of what would be considered their competitors. And I think this is great. Voyager's Starlab is kind of its own consortium on its own. And it's an international consortium we talked about with groups out of Japan, out of Canada, out of the EU, out of the US, all working together to develop their Starlab habitat. So to see them not only partnering across countries, but across companies as well, is very promising. That Voyager is going to be one of the main players in pulling together a lot of this technology to hopefully help accelerate human habitation as the ISS is phased out. Lastly, for today, we have the Finnish satellite manufacturer Reorbit announcing their partnership with Google Cloud to create a network of satellites to securely transport and process data on orbit. A network the partnership is calling the Space Cloud. I find this particularly interesting because Google a few months ago announced Project Suncatcher with Planet, meant to be an orbital data center play with an established space company to launch the TPU hardware that Google develops for their AI data centers. So this is odd because the way that Reorbit's describing it is that this is going to be an orbital data center play as well. But I think what it sounds more like, and I think Reorbit's just hyping it up a little bit, is that this is meant to be a communication infrastructure layer for data centers, and quite possibly Google's data centers on the ground, which they can then expand to data centers on orbit. So Reorbit is, as I said, a Finnish satellite manufacturer. They focus on sovereign satellite capabilities. So most likely this is Google basically buying their own fleet of satellites from this manufacturer to create their own communications layer, which makes a lot of sense given that Amazon has recently commissioned LEO. Amazon Leo. I think that this is Google's response to that, to kind of jumpstart their own communication layers since they're kind of late to the game. But if they're really serious about playing in the orbital data center field, they're going to need it. It's what gives SpaceX and Amazon the leg up to pursue this sort of effort. And Google could potentially leapfrog into that by building this out with Reorbit in parallel with building out the actual orbital data centers with Planet, and becoming a serious player in the space through partnerships. Well, that's a wrap for this week's recap of the space industry. We hope you enjoyed the episode. As always, please drop us a comment, check out our socials, and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you're receiving this signal. Until next time, this is Harrison Lambert and Paul Mayer signing off for now.